It's time for another Dirt Daily, and I am back in the shop working on the big block swap that I'm putting into my CJL10. This is an 8.1 liter Chevy engine, 496 cubic inch. This was in my Avalanche. It has a 4L85 automatic transmission and an Atlas transfer case. And in the past, I built motor mounts and I built all the brackets on the frame and I got it settled in there just right. And this past week, I worked on it every day. And the stuff that I did is kind of minor, but it's all the little bits that you have to do when you're doing a project like this. It was so minimal that half the time I didn't film any of it. And then I was like, what am I going to show everybody at the end of this week? And there are these little steps that you have to do on these types of things. It's not cool stuff. You're not cutting and welding and measuring and laying the thing in and forklifting it in and out 1,000 times. It's little monotonous, hard projects that make the big project better in the end, but you kind of have to chip away at these little things. It's the nickel and dimes that eat up the entire budget because you're like, oh, well, I'll go buy this thing. Oh, now I got to go buy that thing. So I did a bunch of little things on it all week long, and I'm going to show you guys some of the little steps that are involved in putting this together. There are still more big steps that are going to come in the future, but these are some little things that I kind of chipped away at this week, and you'll see it's not all that glamorous like cutting and welding and super fabricating to build a cool truck. Sometimes it's laying in the dirt underneath the thing trying to get a fitting to go in exactly where you want it. All right, come check it out. So as you may recall, the power steering pump used to live down here below the alternator on this bracket. This bracket was a part of this other bracket, but this bracket had to get cut off because it was crashing into the steering gearbox, and the power steering pump will no longer fit in this corner. So I modified this whole bracket, cut it off, ground it clean, and then put the alternator back on because that was something that I need an alternator, but I can't put the power steering pump where it used to be. So I just modified the bracket, so that's back in place. The power steering pump arrived from PSC, and I now need to figure out where it's going to live. It's either going to live in this corner or maybe down here. And if it lives down here, it'll basically take the place of where the air conditioning compressor was. But if it lives up here, maybe in the future I could have air conditioning. So, and the pump's pretty small, so I'll be able to kind of figure that out. That's for a future project. Now the next thing I did was, this engine used to have an oil cooler lines that lived up in here. And you can just see these two brass fittings that are in there now. That is where the old oil cooler lines came out. So I had to take those out. I had to find the proper fittings. On this one, it was 1/2-inch pipe thread, and then put some Teflon tape and tightened those guys in. And then I also put the remote oil filter fitting contraption on where the oil filter used to live. These are the two oil cooler fittings that I replaced with those brass plugs. So these are now trash. I can throw those away. In addition to that, when I put on that remote oil filter kit, something I didn't do in the past that I have since learned is the way to do this is there's a little tiny valve that lives up inside the center of the engine block where the oil filter screws in. And if you don't remove this, you can get low oil pressure readings on your oil gauge. And I found this online. There's a great video. In fact, I'll link a couple of these videos in the description below, both on some transmission stuff and also on this fitting, because if you remove this fitting, then it helps the oil flow better. And it's really simple you just take a bolt, a 3/8 bolt, and kind of ramrod it up in there, screw it in, and then yank this thing out, and that's supposed to help the oil flow better. So that's another thing I got rid of. Now, I put the remote oil filter setup on this because right in here is the pinion at full stuff, and there's going to be exhaust here, and if there was an oil filter hanging down right here, it would be really tight. On the Avalanche, the front drive shaft used to smash into the oil filter that lived in that corner, so I had this remote oil filter set up on the Avalanche. Now Now the trick is, where am I going to put an oil filter that will be remote? So that's probably going to be up in the front somewhere. Maybe, I mean, it could go in this area, but that's where the radiator is going to live. Here's where all the steering box swings. I guess I could possibly hang it off of the engine on this bracketry. So I'm not really sure exactly where the oil filter will live, but I do know that it's going to have a remote filter somewhere. Maybe it's even living way up here by the winch. You wanted to have it somewhere where when you do an oil change, you can just reach in and grab it. So this might look like it would be easy access right here now, but if there's a fan shroud and a radiator and fenders and a grill, it may be very buried. It may be very buried. It would be hard to get to. So somewhere in the front, or maybe even back here underneath between the engine or the transmission and the frame, you could put the oil filter back in here. Another thing I did was I changed the front output on the Atlas to this yoke. This yoke was on the 4-speed Atlas that was behind the diesel when I originally built this with the Nissan diesel. And I had to swap it over because I want to reuse the drive shafts that I made when we first built this. I had drive shafts custom made by Tom Woods, and I wasn't sure if they would fit. I'm pretty sure the length is longer, but not enough longer that I can't reuse the drive shaft. So the front drive shaft will be a little bit longer. The rear drive shaft will be a little bit shorter. So I'm hoping that everything can be reused, and luckily the drive shafts have enough travel in them that they will compensate for moving the Atlas back a little bit, because the 4L80 is a little bit longer than the TorqueFlite 727. So everything is coming together. It's all tight, but I think it's going to be good, and that means I don't have to send the drive shafts back or order new drive shafts. While we're right here, let's talk about this little guy. This is the manual shift shaft, and this is the shaft that has an arm that goes on it, and a lot of times these get in the way of the front drive shaft. Like the arm will stick down, the drive shaft will come up at full articulation or full stuff, and it'll hit that arm and it'll break it or bend it or whatever. Originally this 4L80 had a longer shaft. It looked like this one, and it stuck out probably 1.5 inches longer than the way this one's sticking right now. And I had found in the past that you can convert it to an earlier shaft, and you can order this shaft off of Summit Racing, and you can swap it in without too much drama. You have to drop the pan, drop the filter, take off a few pieces of hardware, pull out a little tiny pin, and then you can swap it out for this earlier version that's shorter. And the nice thing about this earlier version is it pulls the shifter arm way in tight against the side of the transmission, making it easier to shift and clearance for the front drive shaft. I did this swap before on my summer camp Jeep, and it was a pain in the neck because that little tiny pin that I mentioned was kind of broken off up inside there. This time it went pretty smooth, and I didn't have the truck on the lift, so I was laying here in the dirt on this nasty towel soaked in ATF, and I was still able to get it all swapped over in about an hour and put a new gasket on, a new filter, and basically the transmission is ready for fluid, and everything should be clear now. This will be a plug for the transmission control unit, and that is often a concern because this plug comes out, the drive shaft's right here, and you want to make sure that that plug and drive shaft don't get into each other. But a lot of times you can bring the plug, the wiring harness out from that, kind of route it back and tuck it in, or put a P-clamp on it off of one of these fasteners and hold it up out of the way. So I feel like the transmission's getting way dialed. I did this swap before. It makes it much nicer. I have a cable activated Art Car Winners style shifter that'll go on here that I got through Wide Open Design, and now I can put that arm down and bolt everything in, and it should be clear from the front drive shaft. Here is another step where I put brand new fluid in the Atlas transfer case. Now, The goal with the Atlas fluid level is to have the level right about in line with the center of this cap here. And unfortunately, the Atlas doesn't have an easy way to put fluid in. So I disconnect this upper part of the sight tube, and I have another hose that attaches here, goes to a little tiny funnel, and I pour the fluid down in through it right there. It takes forever, but you have to do it, and you have to get the right fluid in there. I'm running a synthetic fluid, 75-90 weight, and it's what they recommend for the Atlas. So it wasn't an exciting thing to film, but it's something that you were going to want to do, especially if you're reusing an Atlas. I just pulled the bottom out, drained all the old fluid out, and swapped that fresh fluid in. Actually, I put a new sight tube on too, because the old sight tube was kind of crusty and faded over. So the Atlas has the new front yoke, the new sight tube, and new fluid, and everything's ready to go. Oh, I do need to tighten up the shifters a little bit. They kind of flop around a little bit. And I know that Advanced Adapters has a new style, but I think if I just disconnect everything, clean it up, grease it, and bolt it in tight, it should be good to go. Another thing I did was I took the old ATF that was in the transmission, and I ran it through a filtered funnel into an old can of acetone so that it's half acetone, half ATF. Why do that? Well, this is a great penetrating oil like a WD-40 or a PB Blaster, but it's super cheap. So you just take acetone, ATF, mix it together, and then you put it in either a spray bottle or a little old oil can. And then if you have hardware that's locked up, you can spray it with that, let it sit for a couple days, and it usually helps eat through the rust and loosen stuff up. So cheap man's penetrating oil, ATF acetone. Make sure you label the can so that you don't grab it thinking it's actually acetone and try to like do some paint work with it and you'll ruin your paint job. Another project I dove into this week was the fuel tank. This was the original CJ10 fuel tank. It was made to hold diesel. In fact, it was mostly full of diesel fuel, but it was red dyed agriculture diesel, which you're not really supposed to run it in a street-driven vehicle. So I didn't dump it into my Dodge tow rig. I wasn't really sure how old it was or how clean it was. So we ran it through some filters, and then we actually put it in a neighbor's tractor. So it should be just fine running an old tractor. In addition to that, the fuel filler neck was not accessible because it was underneath the bed in a spot that you could never get the fuel filler hose to. So I modified the tank. I cut a hole at this end and then welded a new piece of pipe in, which welding to a fuel tank, a little sketchy. I'm not really sure that I would recommend you do it if you haven't done it before. But what I did was, the first thing I did was I drained all the fuel out of it, and then I filled it up with water and like Dawn dish soap and kind of flushed all of the residue out of it. I also stuck a shop vac in there and tried to suck up any rust that was in there. And then I used some Evap-O-Rust, which is great for rusty old steel. And I kind of flushed the inside of it out multiple times, trying to get the inside as clean as possible. And then I cut this and welded this in. Now, you can do this a lot of different ways. You can put argon in the tank. You can hook the exhaust from a vehicle up and fill the tank up with exhaust fumes, whatever you want to do. I let the thing air out for most of the week before I welded it, and I was hoping it wouldn't explode, and it didn't explode, so I feel good about that. And I had to put this filler neck at more of an angle so that it's accessible from outside of the tank, and I also painted gas on the side because I am now going to be spending a whole bunch of money on gas to fill this thing up and run this big block. Here's the thing about this tank though. I don't want this to be the only tank. I want to put a factory JL unlimited fuel tank in the CJL10 chassis, and I don't have that yet. So this may become an auxiliary tank where I fill it up and then this is pumped into the main JL tank. I have to get my hands on one and figure out if it'll fit with the modifications that we did to the frame in the past. But I did put a new fuel sending unit in that comes with its own little gauge, some import one that I found that came with a gauge and everything. So I can put this in, wire it in, and I might change the sending unit. It's not the sending unit, but the fuel pickup that's right here to something that's not as crusty to make sure that I have a good fuel. I could run the engine off of this, but I've kind of decided that I'm gonna set it up as an auxiliary tank for now, and then if we get our hands on the JL tank, we'll run dual tanks. So it's a big block, it's gonna be thirsty, and this tank fits underneath there pretty easily, so I'm hoping I can have both of them. We'll see once I get the second tank if everything jives the way I'm picturing it will, but I have a fuel sending unit, I cleaned the thing out, I cut and welded it, I put a little bit of spray paint on it. I'm gonna find a cap for this with a vent, and that's a return line over there, so it's all coming together. This is about ready to go back in to the Jeep. I also did some work this week on the cab, the CJ10 cab. Now, if you look closely, you can probably notice that the windshield frame is a slightly different green color than the rest of the body. Well, I had a little windshield incident. It wasn't really an incident, but my JL noob sock, my two-door JL that I drive all the time, I got a crack in the windshield. Not uncommon. These Jeeps with their almost vertical windshields get cracks all the time. So I called a guy and he was like, yeah, I can come put a windshield in it. And then I was like, well, I have this FJ80, my Dirty 80 project. I said, how about you do both? Put a windshield in the 80 and also put a windshield in the JL. And then I was like, well, actually, the windshield in the CJ10 is garbage. It's all faded around the edges. And when I worked on this back in Michigan, I noticed that the entire bottom of the windshield frame was rotted out. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna track down a new CJ7 windshield frame, and I'll probably have you put 3 windshields in. I'll do the JL, the FJ80, and the CJ10. So he came and he pulled the windshield out of the CJ7 windshield frame that I found used locally, and there was rust. So I had 2 rusty windshield frames at this point. I had the original CJ10 one, rusty underneath the bottom, underneath the windshield wipers, and then the new CJ7, new used CJ7 windshield frame, also rusty. And finally I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just order one online. They're still making CJ7 windshield frames. They're probably pumped out of some factory in some foreign land. And I was like, you know what? I need a windshield frame, and I need one that's rust-free. I don't want to do all this work and put a windshield in and have it hiding rust. So I tracked down a windshield and I had it shipped to me, and the guy came, he did all 3 windshields. He did the JL, the FJ80, and this windshield frame, and it was awesome. Super cool, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Well, lemon turned into not so lemonade, because it turns out the windshield didn't want to go back on the cab. The gasket that goes in between the windshield frame and the top of the cowl is like new and too thick, too puffy. So when I leaned the windshield back, I couldn't get it to go back and match the angle of the doors. But it's rubber, and I was like, eventually this rubber will like compress and probably allow it to go. So I put a giant ratchet strap around the thing, and I had a ratchet strap around the bottom of the tub and over the roof, because I basically had the windshield had to come back and the roof had to come down and reach over top of it before I could bolt it all together. And I got it all together. It's a little bit different shade of green, but the whole thing's kind of different shades of green, so I'm not that worried about it. And there's still gaps between the door and the windshield. There's only just a little bit, maybe like 1/4 of an inch. So I could either probably put some sort of weather stripping in there, or it's an old Jeep and they're gonna leak, because that's what they do. So I'm not that concerned about it. But it did take some fighting to get this aftermarket repop. I had to like loosen all the hinges and loosen all the bolts and push it back. Oh, and before I did that, I put all the wipers back in and had to get all the vents and everything lined back up. So that was another project this week that was a lot of fighting and cursing, and not really a kid-friendly video, because I was like, but it's in and it looks good and I have a nice clean windshield. So when I get the cab back on. Oh, and while I was in there, I also pulled the brake master cylinder off because I want to go to the Hydro Boost that was on the Avalanche. So there was a bunch of in the cab. Oh, and the funny part was I had this giant ratchet strap going around the cab and other ratchet straps going over the cab, and then I had to get inside to run the screws in that hold the roof to the windshield. So I'm like doing this contortionist, like Cirque du Soleil thing to like get inside and then screw all the fasteners in. But I'm stoked it's all together now, so another thing off the list. I have not actually test fit the cab onto the chassis with the big block in, but I'm getting close to that point where, and it's gonna take a bit because I'm gonna have to lower it down and kind of wiggle it around and move it with floor jacks and get it all lined up just right, and then figure out if all of this stuff can stay or if I'm gonna have to hack away firewall on the back of the big block. So I really did a fair bit this week of little tiny things. I spent a bunch of money, ordered little parts like that shifter shaft and like finding pieces of hardware and gas tank bits and a fuel sending unit and all windshield. But that's what it is. Like there's lots of these little steps that you have to do, and you can either get frustrated by them or you can just slowly chip away at them and they slowly come together. In fact, that brings up another thing. I was shooting to have this thing done to take it to a big event, and then I realized, well, for two things. One, I need to have a different vehicle at that event, my newer Jeep, and two, I was like, having a deadline on this is not gonna help me get it done. It's gonna get me frustrated and stressed out because I'm trying to get it done sooner than it's just gonna get done. So it's not gonna show up at any events right away. I'm gonna keep working on it. I may even roll it into the corner and work on a few other things on other vehicles just to kind of get those up to speed and then get back to it. But I'm having a lot of fun working on it, and when I'm not trying to get it done for a deadline, it kind of takes all the stress off. You're not overnighting parts to get to you in time. You're buying the stuff that you actually want, not the stuff that you can get your hands on in time. And also, it's like it's kind of stress-free. If the thing's fighting you and you're getting frustrated, instead of throwing the tools, you can just kind of set the tools down and walk away, go work on something else, and then come back and actually get back to it. So I don't know if that's the right way to do it. Sometimes having a deadline is what people need, but for me, I found that like getting rid of the deadline on this project has been a good thing because I can just fiddle with it, tinker with all these little bits, and keep chipping away at it. So I'm not really sure what the next thing is I'm going to work on the CJL10. I want to dive into exhaust. I want to figure out the radiator. I need to make a mount for that power steering pump so that I can get power steering to everything. And when I do that, I got to think about all the belt routing and how it's going to go around the water pump and the alternator and the idlers and make sure it actually works the way I want it to work. So I have a lot of different little projects, and I have to just pick one and dive into it. And even more, I want to drop the cab on the frame and see if it's going to clear or if I have to completely hack the whole firewall in order to make everything fit, which I'm crossing my fingers it's going to go together nice, but you never know. All right, that's it for this Dirt Daily. Next time you see the CJL10, hopefully it'll look different and it won't just be a bunch of little fiddle-faddles here and there to get it all done. We'll see you guys next time.